Some people look to the stars and ask, what if? Our job is to have an answer. We have to imagine what will be imagined. Plan for what's possible while it's still impossible. Maybe you weren't put here just to ask the questions. Maybe you were put here to be the answer. Maybe your purpose on this planet isn't on this planet.
The actual concept behind the US Space Force makes perfect sense. You have this domain of space that's so important economically, militarily, in terms of communications. It makes sense to have a dedicated branch of the armed forces monitoring for threats in that domain and developing defenses against them. And as a matter of fact, Russia and China have their own services within their armed forces doing exactly that. The problem for US Space Force starts when we consider the corporate financier special interests that actually drive US foreign policy and how they are going to abuse the US Space Force the same way they abuse all the other branches of the US Armed Forces. When they talk about defending America's global positioning system, they're not talking about defending it against a Russian or Chinese attack, disrupting services over the United States and impacting the country economically. They're talking about China or Russia disrupting the GPS in places like Syria. So this is an article from the National Interest. It's titled GPS Jammed, Russia is Messing with America's F-35s. And here it says, Russian forces have been jamming GPS systems in the Middle East. The electronic warfare campaign could affect US forces gathering in the region in advance of potential strikes on Iran. They also talk about Syria, and of course, we all know the US is also involved in Yemen, Iraq, everywhere basically. And just in this one article, you can see everything that's wrong with this picture. This is the US carrying out illegal military aggression thousands of miles away from its own shores. The US Space Force, if it somehow finds a way to stop Russia from jamming its GPS satellites, that's not going to be to defend the US. It's going to be to stop countries like Russia and Syria from defending themselves against illegal US military aggression. Now, the US Space Force depends on the US aerospace industry, and undoubtedly, SpaceX and Elon Musk, who heads SpaceX, is a key figure in this industry. And it was interesting watching him interact with this US Air Force general at the Symposium last year. And it was interesting how this general, like many in the US Armed Forces, have it stuck in their mind that China is a US adversary that needs to be stopped. It cannot be allowed to surpass the United States. And Elon Musk describes China in this way.
Well, I think China is a real interesting country, I have to say. The thing to appreciate about China is just that there's a lot of really smart, really hardworking people there, and they're going to do a lot of great things. The thing that will feel pretty strange is that the Chinese economy is going to be probably at least twice as big as the US economy. Maybe 3 times, but at least twice. And that assumes a GDP per capita still less than the US. Since they have about 4 or 5 times the population, then it would only require getting to a GDP per capita of half the United States for their economy to be twice the size of ours. As I'm sure people in this room know, the foundation of war is economics. If you have half the resources of the counterparty, then you better be real innovative. If you're not innovative, you're going to lose.
Obviously, China is geographically an enormous country, and in terms of population, it has the largest population on Earth. And if allowed to develop on its own, inevitably it will have a larger economy than the United States. It has resources, it has more people. Why wouldn't it have a larger economy? And the only way the US could stop that from happening is if it somehow found a way to accelerate its own economic growth at a faster rate than China and at a larger rate, and also maybe stop China somehow, artificially arrest development in China, which would require force. So again, we're watching the US Space Force being set up not to defend the US, but to stop other countries from defending themselves against US aggression and the US agenda of asserting primacy over the entire globe, not defending itself, its country, and its people, but putting itself over all other nations on Earth. And I think what Elon Musk was trying to tell that Air Force general, and which was like talking to a wall, was that the US needs to learn how to exist in a world where China will inevitably surpass the United States. And it is a world where the US will not be the largest, most powerful country in the world, but it can find a place among nations rather than trying to impose itself upon all nations. It's also a world that every other country sees itself in right now. Every other country is smaller and weaker than the United States at the moment. And they've all found ways of living in that world and having a constructive role in that world. Why can't the US do the same thing? So the US Space Force is a great concept. It was a long time coming. Unfortunately, it's being abused at the moment, and it will continue to do so as long as the US government and the corporations driving the policy of that government are bent on hegemony and primacy and not just defending the country. So this is a topic that's going to come up for the rest of this year. I'm going to continue covering this. To my Patreon patrons who are making these videos possible on a day-to-day basis, thank you so much for that support. Please like and share the video if you thought it was useful. Think about subscribing to the channel. It helps the channel grow, and it's totally free to do. Check the video description for the links to these videos that I showed, as well as to the article, as well as to ways you can help support my work, like by becoming a Patreon member. And to everyone who is helping me in every way, regardless, thank you so much. I couldn't do it without that support. And as always, thank you for watching.